Here I have prepped the pieces for my all folded up case. Excuse me. I have a piece that is 9 inches wide, and the length is the length of the fat quarter. This has also been cut 9 inches by the length of the fat quarter, and this is the 22 length, the 22-inch length. I have, as you can see, Franken batted my stabilizer, made some Franken batting, and I'm going to layer all these 3 pieces, wonder clip around my edges, and then I will go and I'm going to go to the sewing machine to quilt, and I'm going to use this grid on the fabric. This is the lining fabric, and this is my outer fabric. So that grid will help determine my quilting lines. I'm not going to do each line. I'm going to section it so it's not too much quilting. And here I have my piece all wonder clipped and ready to go. You will notice that I didn't really trim the edges off of here. This piece isn't exactly 9 by 22 inches square. The stabilizing flex foam is like 9 1/4 by 21 or 22. So I'm not really being very exact because this will all get trimmed down eventually. When doing the quilting, you will want to take into consideration thread use. I'm going to be using this for my burgundy mulberry print side, and I'm going to be using an orange bobbin for the top side. Sometimes I would use a contrast on one side or the other, but in this case I want them to kind of blend into the background, so that's what I'm going to use. When laying down my quilting lines, I will quilt back and forth across the sides. Then when I get to these edges, I will travel down at 1/8 of an inch down to the next line that I'm going to quilt, and that will help keep these fabric edges together. Okay, so I have cut off the excess fabric at the bottom where there was no stabilizer. I have straightened these edges, and it now measures approximately 9 inches by 19 1/2. So I will now just sew 1/8 of an inch around all 4 sides to make sure that anything that was trimmed off or wasn't caught during my quilting is now as secure as possible, so I don't have anything flip back on me while I'm sewing the pockets on. Now I'm ready to cut my vinyl to use for my pockets. This is a medium weight multi-purpose vinyl covering, so it's got a little bit of heft to it. It won't be easily cut or scratched or marred, poked holes in. So you want to use something like a medium to heavy weight, not a lightweight, for these pockets. You'll want to cut at least 15 inches by 9 inches so that you know you'll have enough to cut out the 3 pockets. So I've got more than 15 inches here, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut all the way through this piece, and I'll just put away the excess after I cut out my pockets. Now, it is much easier to see the edges of this vinyl through this camera lens than the naked eye when you're trying to cut it, but I think I've got approximately 9 inches by 15 inches long, and now I'm going to cut my 3 sections. I'm going to cut a 4 inch, a 4 1/2 inch, and a 4 3/4 inch by 9 inch pieces. And here I have my pieces cut, my 4, 4 1/2, and 4 3/4 inches. Now I'm going to take my binding fabric and prepare that so that I can start sewing my pockets together. For the binding on the case, you can use a bias binding, which is recommended, or you can actually cut it on the straight of grain widthwise. There's enough give in fabric on that widthwise grain, not the lengthwise as it comes off the bolt, but the width of your fabric. So if you want to cut the bias, because it is a little bit stretchier, I line up that straight edge of my selvage with one of the lines on my mat, and then I fold it in half and bring it to a perpendicular line. And then I would cut in this fashion across the fabric, and I would be cutting 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. You'll need about 60 inches of binding if you're using the length of your fat quarter, as in this case, which is about 20 inches when I cut this. If you're using the actual lengthwise grain cut, which is about 18 inches, you can get away with about 55 inches for your strips. Since I know that I can get a little bit of a gentle curve out of this widthwise grain, I'm going to go ahead and cut 3 strips at 2.5, and then I'm going to cut my 2-inch strips. And since I need 6 pieces and this length will only give me 2 per cut, I will need 3 cuts at 2 inches. Now I'm going to make the binding for the zipper pockets. And of course, I've got a 2-inch strip. I've got my 2-inch bias binding tool, and I'm just going to pull that first edge out. And I like to get a little bit out and set my parameters for the binding, and then just pull and press. Pull and press. Don't get too far ahead of yourself, because those strips tend to widen and pull apart as you get too far away from the bias binding maker. Pull and press until you have that strip complete, and then you go back, fold over, and give a good steam press again to really get that creased and set. And you want to try to get all of your edges even so that there's no excess showing from either side. And then rinse and repeat. For the other binding that will go around the edge of the case, I have my 3 strips cut, which gives me the necessary length that I need, and I always give my edges that 45-degree slant, and then we'll sew them together in this fashion. This just reduces bulk, and you really want to try to decrease that seam bulk around these cases. So I will sew all of these together, actually, this piece to this piece, and then this piece to that piece to make that one long continuous strip. Then I will press the seams open, fold that in half, and be set. Now we want to prep our vinyl pockets with our binding strips, and you're going to place your binding strips on each side of your pockets except for the shortest one, which is at the bottom. So that 4-inch is your bottom pocket. The 4.5 inch is the next pocket, and the 4 3/4 pocket is at the top. You're going to take a binding strip, and the open edge is going to wrap around the vinyl. And you can use some wonder clips, but what you don't want to do is go in too deep and have the clip impact the vinyl. So make sure you're staying within the binding strip and not exceeding past that edge. The middle pocket will have a binding strip at top and bottom, and just get your edges matched up. But again, these will all be trimmed down once the final product is finished, so you don't have to worry too much about it. And then repeat for the top of the pocket. Then you're going to place a strip on either side of the top pocket, and that last strip will go above the top pocket, but it will not have any vinyl sewn within it. It will have zipper. It will be sewn to the top zipper. So take this to the sewing machine. I always sew as close to this edge as possible, making sure that I'm catching both front and back edges, and top stitch with the stitch length of your choice. Now we are going to place the zippers in between our binding strips, and I like to make it fun with my zippers using different colors. You want to at least have the width needed to cover the pocket, and this will end up being about 8 inches, so this zipper is a 9-inch. Some zippers are bigger than others, and that's fine. You can use whatever length as long as you have excessive length and not too short of a length. And these zippers are going to be placed in between the binding strips. You'll want the zipper pull to be to the left, or if you don't want it that way, to the right, however you prefer to open and close your zippers. So you're going to place them and sew, and then that top binding strip, the zipper tape is going to go into the fold of it and be secured in that fashion. When you are sewing the zippers in, always be careful that you have this folded edge up as close to the zipper teeth as possible, and then you're going to lay down a top stitching line that's about the same distance as the previous line you stitched when you secured the vinyl, just for aesthetic reasons. But you can sew very close to that, and that zipper will still open for you. So as long as you're not crossing over the zipper tape, you're fine, or I'm sorry, the zipper teeth. So sew, keeping these edges as close as possible, and of course opening your zipper to get around the zipper pull as you sew. Then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. Here is my finished pocket section. The one thing that I would give you a tip as far as when you're sewing all this together is trying to keep this all even spacing. You can see here it got a little bit shallow on this end. When you trim everything down, it's not a big issue, but you just want to have as much levelness when you go to sew the case all together. But again, this will be squared up when we attach it to the piece, which is what we're going to do now. Here I have my pocket piece on top of my case, and I kind of have it evened up at the bottom here, but you want to have these sides aligned as much as possible. And what you're going to do now is put some clips right here on the edges. Remember, do not clip onto the vinyl, as that will cause a mark. And if you need to get rid of the zipper tapes that are in your way, you can easily cut through those vinyl teeth. and I will show you how to get this zipper pull back on. But for now, we're just gonna clip things in place. And the other tip that you really need to be aware of when you are sewing around, this isn't a problem because there's no metal piece there, but you do have these metal pieces here which will go away when we trim things down. But you kind of want to be aware of where those are at when you're sewing so your needle does not break. You can pull your zippers into the center. And then put another clip here. But another important item is making sure that this is level across the top as much as possible. I always take a ruler and I kind of get a marking for where this side is, slide it across to that side to make sure that that is in line. Another way that you can do it is getting an idea of how far down that is. You can use a marking pen and draw a line across there. That way, as you're sewing, you can make sure that this line is staying even in that regard. But what you want to do now is you want to go ahead and you can sew in about 1/4 of an inch all the way around, because ultimately this is going to get trimmed down when we have it secured. But for right now, I like to just do 1/4 of an inch all the way around, starting and stopping here. Then we're going to secure the pockets and then we will trim it all down. To replace a zipper pull that has been pulled off, you're going to go down here and angle the one side in, and then kind of holding that in place, angle your other side in. And this can be very, very tricky, but it is 100% doable. And try to get those to start working their way up, holding those ends. Just work it in there and it's back on. Now that I have these secured with a stay stitch around my edge, I'm going to now go and secure the top binding strip to the body of the case. The top strip, the strip above each zipper, will be sewn down, and then this is going to secure those pockets and separate them on the case. You'll want to go ahead and follow closely that top stitch line that you laid down when you attach the vinyl to these pockets. And of course here you have no top stitch line, so just keep it about the same width from the edge as your previous lines. I'm going to go sew that. And here I have all of my pockets secured, so nothing will slip from pocket to pocket. Now what I'm going to do is go to my cutting board. I'm going to even up all of these sides and reduce the width down a little bit, making everything a little bit neater. And then I will also use my template to curve the top flap. When I start using my ruler to even out things, I kind of lay this on my ruler and find lines that align with the zipper so that I can make sure I'm getting it at kind of an even position. And then I just give it a trim at the bottom. Sometimes when things shift as you're sewing, your vinyl and your bottom might not line up too well, so go ahead and cut that so that you don't have any gaps there at the bottom between your vinyl. It might shorten that pocket a little bit, but better to be, sorry, hit the camera prop, better to be lined up without any gaps than to be off. And then I turn this and giving that bottom then the lining it up with one of my ruler marks, my rotary mat mark. I determine how far in I need to be to eliminate those metal pieces if I have them. And then go ahead and using an older blade, because I'm cutting through those vinyl teeth, trim off this side. And sometimes you need to do it a little bit more to get those edges off. Then turn it so that I can trim the next side. And here then I line up this upper corner down the edge and across the top, and kind of looking to make sure zippers are somewhat lined up. Pull my zippers into the center, but do not go off of this edge because I've now cut away my original stay stitch line. If I cut here, then I am at 8 inches, but I've got a little bit of excess that doesn't involve sewing over any metal parts on the teeth. So I'm going to cut this at 8.5 instead of 8. That's why having that 9-inch beginning gives you the ability to trim things up nicely. Then you're going to take your template to round off your corners, and using a marking device, mark those curves and then cut them away. And then we're ready for binding. Before attaching the binding, I do go back and do another 1/8 of an inch stabilizing stitch around all the edges to keep things from shifting when I'm trying to apply the binding. And now I'm ready to attach my binding. Start where you prefer. I always go from the inside and sew it down, and then turn to the front whenever I'm doing the binding. Now that I have my binding sewn on and tacked down, it's time to place my snaps for the back. The reason why these pockets are uneven is because it helps to create a break for the roll of your bag. This one has a deeper flap than this one. It really is all personal choice. The one thing you don't want to do is roll it up too tightly and bring the flap down too far, because then you won't have very much room to put things in. So you just want to kind of break it at the top of those binding strips, kind of give it a roll, and then bring down your flap and kind of get an idea of where that's going to meet. One of these female part will end up positioned inside this pocket. Yes, it's a bear to get that in there with your snap product. I make it work. You may want to go ahead and place that snap before you get all of this stuff attached, but that's going to have to take some calculation on your part as to where this snap is going to end up. In the case of this pouch, it was a little bit closer to the bottom, but you can see I have more depth in this flap, so that means my flap is going to come down farther into the bag. So I estimate it's probably going to be more of a halfway position. But what I want to do first is put this snap in. I'm going to trim my little threads there. That will bother me. And you want to place that well above the binding so that it doesn't catch the binding in the snap. And you also want to have it about halfway between your flap edges. So just lay a ruler down. I'm at 8.5 wide on my flap. And so that's going to be about 4.25. And then just go ahead and push this in, push that prong through. And then I've chosen to go with colors that match the outer and the inner fabric so that it's not, I didn't want this dark color on the out of the case outside, and I didn't want this bright pink on the inside. So let's just disguises it a little bit more. And oops, I'm doing that upside down. So you want to slip your clamp over the parts, and you have secured that. And then what I do is loosely roll my case, pull that flap down, and I kind of give a eyeball and take a marking tool and put a mark right into that. And so that's how I know where to place that. And just play with it a little bit more, make sure that I've got some looseness in there. Eyeball it again, and that's where I will place that. And so in this case, the male part needs to be on the outside of this case, and the flat part needs to be inside there. So let me get my marking device. And I'm going to say it's going to be right about there. And then I will take and insert this into, and actually, to help myself, pull away the vinyl from behind in the pocket, and I can push this through and kind of create that hole by separating the fibers of the fabric. And then that way I can see that a little bit better from this side. And I can put that back through the hole. And place this on top. And if you can't get those things to stay in position when you go to put your clamp inside, I've even resorted to tape to hold it in place. But basically, you just have to pull your way into the middle there, and I've got it upside down again. So let me do it the right way. And you're just gonna manipulate it however you need to get that cap into the well. And then you have your other part into the clamp. Clamp it down. Pull this back out. Pull that part out. Just want to make sure you have flattened the bead in there. Test your snap, roll it up, and you are done with your all folded up case. After I finished, I noticed that I had left the wrong color in my bobbin when I was sewing across the binding strips. So I've gone back with my orange bobbin, and I'm now going to take out this darker thread. That may not bother you, but that is something to consider, is that anytime you're attaching pieces inside and out, make sure that you are matching your thread to the fabric that you prefer. And here is the refinished case with the correct color cap and male part. And to not waste a thing, this will be the next case. Outside fabric, inside fabric, binding fabric, and zipper colors. We'll see how that one turns out.